Next question. This is from Kara Dansky. I am curious about the use of the phrase gender critical. I know that some women oppose it, but Maureen said that use of the phrase in the courts is a positive development. I tend to agree with her, but I'm also wondering if we can tease that out a bit more.
In relation to the terminology gender critical and gender abolitionist, I mean, here anyway, women who are opposed to the idea of incorporating gender into law in any shape or form and don't believe there's such a thing as gender identity at all in any circumstances tend to call themselves gender abolitionist. A lot of women who believe that also call themselves gender critical, so there's quite a lot of overlap. But gender abolitionist is used to emphasise I don't agree with gender in any shape or form. I don't think there should be any legislation which acknowledges gender identity or makes provision in law for gender identity. That is what gender abolitionists, the term tends to signify, at least that's what it signifies to me. Whereas some women who call themselves gender critical wouldn't necessarily go that far, but they're very critical of the concept of gender identity. The term gender critical is much more widely used than gender abolitionist because there are a lot more probably feminists who come within that term than there are feminists who see themselves as gender abolitionists. And for that reason, in cases like, for example, Mayor Forstata's case, it's now being used in the courts. Her beliefs were described as gender critical in the course of the proceedings. And so as that happens in more cases, I think that's the terminology that will be taken on. And it's useful to us if the courts do have a knowledge of what gender critical means and a knowledge of the debate between gender critical feminists and gender ideology proponents, because I think that they're more likely to understand the women's rights perspective in all this if they understand what the term gender critical means. So I think it's positive that it was that terminology was used in Mayor Forstata's case, and if it is taken up by the court. I think the courts might be a bit alarmed by a term like gender abolitionist. They would probably think, oh, abolitionists, so they want to abolish the Gender Recognition Act. Well, they might, depending on how much they thought things through. And so they could see that as extremist, I think. So gender critical, to my mind, broadly covers all of us. We're all critical of gender identity ideology to different degrees. And I think it's good that the courts have taken on that term because they will think more, I think, about what it means to be critical of gender ideology. Why do women object to the concept of gender identity? What's the relationship between that and sex-based rights? I think if they know that and they start to talk about that more and it starts to be terminology that's used in legal proceedings more, then that will broaden things out. At the moment, all judges are getting is the nonsense that's in the bench book, and probably training from lobby groups who talk nonsense as well. And so I think it's good that they at least have that concept. I mean, the judge's description of Mayor Forstata's gender critical beliefs was pretty accurate, I think. I'd certainly agree with everything that he said she believed in. He understood what she believed in. He just didn't think it was worthy of respect. Whereas I think the judge in the Miller case, he used that terminology, but he clearly thought that gender critical views are worthy of respect. It's very obvious from the way that he wrote the judgment. And in fact, he started off the judgment, which is very unusual, with a quote from George Orwell.